Today, I have the pleasure with speaking with Durant Andy Hunter, co-founder of Ridgeway Partners. And Mr. Hunter, before we go into the success, let's touch base into your childhood. Did your parents want you to be successful as a kid? Did they always push you, oh, you better be successful? Or like they didn't really talk about it. They kind of wanted for you to decide that on your own. Like, what was your upbringing like?
I think I had a real advantage because my father was very well educated. He'd gone to a wonderful prep school and went to Amherst College and got a Harvard MBA. And the other thing about my father was that he was very much involved in the community, and he would talk to me about the importance of being involved in your community and giving back. And that's been manifested throughout the years when I've been on different school boards, or as I told you earlier, I've been on the board of Boys and Girls Club, and now I'm a senior advisor for over 30 years. And it was all premised on the fact that that's what I watched my dad work at the YMCA and the local hospital, and he was chairman of the bank board of our town. And so it just was natural for me to think about um, getting involved in the not-for-profit side of business or life. And it really dovetailed nicely with my executive search practice because I was meeting people. So, kind of going backwards, my parents didn't press me to be successful. I was a pretty active little boy, and I didn't really understand the importance of good grades um, until I got into the JP Morgan or Morgan Guarantee training program. And I was a college athlete, and I realized I needed to do well and compete and win, so to speak, on Wall Street. And that is when sort of the light bulb went on. And from then on, I've tried to be successful in a variety of different ways.
What are some challenges that you faced, and how did you overcome those challenges?
Yeah. Well, the first my first job was close to a disaster. Um, I guess it was my second job. My first job, I worked for a congressman, and I really enjoyed that down in Washington, D.C. And I ended up leaving the congressman and working for a consulting firm in Washington, and basically got fired for for probably maybe I wasn't a very good employee, but I wasn't as bad as the guy told me how bad I was. And but from there, um, I walked out the door, and I actually accomplished what he wanted me to do. He wanted me to raise a certain amount of money, and the last day, a big check came in, and the fellow asked me to stay. And so I said, I knew you could do it. Will you stay now? And I just said, no way. I am out of here. And I ended up going up to New York and getting into Morgan Guarantee, which is now JP Morgan's training program, which is very rigorous and wonderful. I had college professors from Harvard Business School, Stanford Business School, Columbia, and Wharton, and I learned about finance, accounting, um, things like that, and it was viewed as probably one of the most prestigious bank training programs in the country. And to get in there after I'd been kicked around at this company, and not losing faith in myself, but the light did go on that this really mattered, and I better work really hard and work smart. I mean, you just feel like, am I a louse? What am I really that bad? But he was nice. He said I was the worst employee he'd ever had. So
For
anyway,
JP Morgan and Co., it sounded like you had a very bright future on Wall Street. Why did you want to instead
Uh-huh.
co-founder at Ridgeway.
Well, I didn't go there right away. I
Uh,
worked in the bank. I was in their energy department. I became their head recruiter for 18 months, and then I was in international corporate finance. And what I found on was that I could probably, well, before I go to that, my family owned a company up in the in the Berkshires, and for a reason, my uncle and father came to me and said, "Look, would you come home and try to run the family company?" And I was be the sixth generation. It was started in the 1840s. And I was sort of interested in a non-banking experience. And I thought this would be interesting. There were 250 people. It was manufacturing. It was very, very different from my Morgan experience. And I talked to my wife. We left New York City, and we moved to Williamstown, and the factory was in North Adams. And I felt kind of part of a community and helping the community of roughly 250 employees. Um, and I felt I could really give back rather quickly in a place like that. Um, but it was what I found. It was just such a change, and I had become very New York oriented and very finance oriented. And I wasn't a very good mechanical or electrical engineer. And that was the basis of the company that produced large textile machines. And the business had been moving overseas, and we had a number of challenges. So I said to my dad, "Look, this dog's not going to hunt anymore, and we're going to need to figure out how to unwind this and sell it." And that's what we did. And then I found myself, what do I do now? And so that's I joined a consulting firm in Boston, small, and people kept coming to me and saying, "Hey, do you know, Andy, you ought to get in the headhunting business." And uh, I thought about it and said, "Oh, I'm not one of those guys. I don't want to do it." But I realized I could probably help people a lot if I could find good individuals for them, and that's what I ended up doing. That I had sort of a natural talent to assess people and to see, does A go with B. And so I said, I can make some money here. What do I do? And so that's how I got into it.
so it sounds like in a way I could be hyping it up a little bit, but it kind of sounds like you essentially are kind of like a lone wolf in the business world, which my next question for you was going to be how important is mentorship? Like, have you ever had a mentor and like what did you learn from that mentor?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Lone wolf probably isn't really characteristic because I always had people with me. I wanted to have my own company because I wanted to deal just with the client. I didn't want to have to deal with an internal bureaucracy. And that within internal bureaucracies, and you have to go in them. You can't just start on your own. But there sometimes the motives of those people were not aligned to my best interest. And I realized that some of them are very selfish and myopic, and I have a very broad view and a helpful view. And I feel, one plus one can be three or four rather than something else. Um, so let me see, you were asking me my mentor. So my mentor really came through my education experience. I had a very strong foundation in prep school, and I had two or three people that were tremendously influential in my life. My father was an additional person that was had tremendous, and my mother too. But one guy was Ronald Reagan's head of recruiting, named Pendleton James, and Mr. James came to recruit me to work for him and to join him. And so I did, and I ended up building up the firm. So kind of totally about 40 people, and I just joined Penn. It was me and Penn, and he introduced me to almost to all the living presidents and the secretaries of state. because he had appointed those people working for Ronald Reagan. So he would say, I'd look in my Rolodex for a candidate and say, oh, I've got to find someone in my computer. Rolodex is something you don't know, but it was before the computer. And you put the names of people, and Penn would say, Andy, it's not in your Rolodex. It's out there. You've got to get out on the street. And we were in New York, and he said that you just have to start making calls, and you've got to find the person that way. So he was very much, he was a very generous man. He was intelligent and was just uber connected. And that in the search business, you want to have those connections, because you could say, who do you know, who should I call? And I started right at the top, and with his contacts. And from then on, I really never looked back, and I stayed kind of at the top of the tree. And I convinced a longtime good friend of mine who had been at Harvard Business and Morgan Stanley to join me as my partner as Penn and I expanded. So he was the mentor I had. The best mentoring I had was my parents, some of my prep school teachers and coaches, and then this guy, Penn James.
What's an example of a complex, difficult executive search that you had to do? But
Well, I mean, I can tell you one where one of my clients, this is back in a banking crisis, and one of my clients needed someone in the risk area, and the federal government was putting tremendous pressure to fill the position, and it was just really a challenge to find someone who was good, because many of the banks had gone sour given the economic conditions. So I needed to find someone who the government respected, who the business world respected, and the institution that I was working for respected. And so they would say, where are we today? And normally in search, you'd say, okay, it takes 6 weeks or 3 months to find, to land somebody. But this was almost a daily, where are we? Who have you talked to? And the field wasn't that broad. And so you're having to get someone in. You're looking globally for this person, which I did. I actually found, the person overseas. And that was really high pressure. Another one I had was the head of a large pension plan, which is out on the West Coast, and they're very challenging, very political, and once again, everything was secret. I would fly into an airport to try to and go, sort of hide out in a hotel nearby, so that the state newspapers wouldn't get wind that I was in town. What was I proposing? Things like that. And that was I had to fly out to California every week on that assignment. They wanted me there for their meeting on Wednesday every week, and that was a challenge. But anyway, we got them done. And so anyway, it was a lot of sleeplessness.
well, my next question is like, how do you build lasting relationships in the industry?
One of the things sometimes it's hard is that I was in a transaction business. I mean, what you're doing is, I need this, go find it, fill it, buy. I was fortunate to have long-term relationships, and the reason you have them is that you are successful. In the executive search business, if you do not complete searches, they will not retain you for the next search. You may be able to flub one search up, but two, they think, okay, you've lost it. So it was very important to make sure for every client that we were doing the best work, so that we would fill and our fill rate was in the high 90s. I mean, we had better fill rate than I could find anybody else. And that was why we kept our clients for years. And that was the key to success, is placing in the search business, is placing people that last, that rise up after you've placed them, so that you bring them in as a senior vice president and they become president. I mean, give an example. I was sitting with a chairman and a head of a division of a company, and I said, "Don't look at this resume, but this is your person. This is the person that you should hire." And they looked at me like, "Wait a minute." Turns out the guy, eventually became CEO. I mean, they hired him, and he became CEO. I mean, I knew he was really good. But the resume didn't match what they said they wanted. And you usually have to be very careful. You want to find some of the specifications. And if you don't, they think you're not listening, you're not competent. But I had enough confidence in this guy, and I had successfully placed, I don't know, I think I did 40 assignments for that company. So I had a reputation, that credibility. But anyway, glad it worked out.
Let's go back to the education aspect of things. How important is education to you?
Well, through high school, I wasn't a very good student, so I was just really fortunate to graduate. When I got to college, I started getting interested in my studies, and when I look back at some of my early testing scores, I did see I supposedly could do the work. And education was, for me, was good. I was never a great student. But I was really good at getting involved in a lot of student activities. And I ended up being the outstanding Greek of my college. And I didn't want to be the outstanding Greek in your fraternity system. And it was probably because of the charity work that I had got the brothers to do. And one of the reasons I joined that fraternity is they said, "Look, we want you to be good in grades. You're going to go to study hall. We want you to contribute to campus life." Okay, I did that. But I think that education, one, you want to be able to write well. You want to be able to express yourself well. That really helps. And how can you say things using the fewest words to get your point across is a really key, a wonderful arrow to kind of have in your quiver, so that you can pull it out. So when I would look to hire people to work for me, I tended to look for people that had gone to a good school that I could get writing samples from, because we do a lot of everything was in writing. And so I would want to make sure that the person could write well, and express himself or herself. And to give you an example of that is that I started a book club at my company, and we would read a book about, let's say, Jack Welch, who was the former CEO of GE, or we'll read a bio on Phil Knight, who was the founder of Nike. And we'd do it about every 6 weeks, and I would have probably the youngest person in the firm conduct the session, the book club session, because I wanted them to speak up. I wanted them to give their ideas and lead the discussion. And then I had a weekly management meeting, and I always had the youngest person in the firm run the meeting. And once again, I did that so that they would begin to feel confident. And it worked, and it showed, because one of the things that I learned from that first job where I got fired is that we had a meeting at the company, and And then he took me aside afterwards and basically said, what did you think? And I said, well, it's kind of interesting that you didn't call on, me or a couple other people. And he just said, we don't care what you think. Okay. So with that, you can learn as much from a bad experience as you can a good experience. So that thing stuck with me. We don't care. We don't care what you think. And I looked at the young people who worked with me and I said, I care and I want to know what you think. And I'm going to put you in charge of this meeting. So that was, so there was an example that happened 25 or 30 years ago, and I brought it forward to the Ridgeway Partners.
Wow. My last and final question for you today is, what wisdom and knowledge would you like to leave for the next generation?
Ooh, yeah, yeah. Um, I always just think you need to do what's the principal thing to do, the most honest thing. I learned at my experience at Morgan Guaranty that you could win by not cutting corners, by not cutting down people, that you could do your business in a very professional way, without the pettiness and the cutting down people behind their back, or saying, well, let's don't tell the client this, we'll trap them later, or we'll have them in the legal agreement. And so I'm really think that one wants to be extremely positive. And I wrote down, as soon as I was having all this trouble at this company in Washington, I remember going to the Potomac River and sitting there looking out at the river, going, "Oh God, how can I get out of here? Or what should I do?" And I realized I needed to say what I was going to do in life. And I wrote down on a piece of paper exactly what I wanted to accomplish, and and I wrote it down. I still have that piece of paper, and I accomplished kind of everything that I had written down as a 22-year-old, that I wanted to do. But the headline was "Living Principle Love," and so what I wanted to do was to be very principled and very honest, but do it in a loving way, and do it in a so loving could be considerate way. How would I want to be treated? And I think I ask that question now a lot. I say that, well, if I were in their shoes, how would I want to be treated? And even though I said, I don't want to tell them, or it goes back to I better, because I would want to be informed that this was going on behind my back. So I should inform that person so they have knowledge. So it's living principle, honesty, sprinkled with love. And love is consideration, it's unselfishness, it's putting forth, letting someone else put forth their ideas and listening to them first. One of the things I try to do is not interrupt people. It's really hard. You always want to interrupt someone talking, but you really learn a lot letting people finish their sentence. And that was one of the keys I had in executive search, is that I let people finish their sentence. And I found out a lot of things at the end of a sentence that gave me enlightenment about their personality, their competencies, things like that. Anyway, so good. I'm glad we could talk.
That's a lot of wisdom. Thank you so
Yeah.
much, Hunter.